Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
All right, welcome to the show. Brandon, I guess I feel like now every time that we start the show, it's going to be apologizing for the fact that we've just been off for a couple weeks. But has it been 2 weeks? Maybe.
It's been a week. I think we took we had week off. So we had Coach on 2 weeks ago, had week off. Now we're back.
There you go. So speaking of Coach, great. As we said, it was like, one of those things where, as I have been talking to people who listen to the show pretty regularly, there's, those that will come up and they will say things like, oh, I really liked what he had to say about this particular leadership concept, or I liked his point of reference on, coaching like you would parent, or like you would talk to your kids or family members, that type of thing, just to kind of, lessen some of that edge you have about you. But one of the things that strikes me that everybody has commented on, and you and I even brought it up when we were doing the introduction, is I don't really, and I don't want to sell this, but I just don't think we really can emphasize enough how much of a role he had in the last 40 years of the NBA. Like, some of the things he's been able to observe and be around is just incredible. And I think that's what I think people are drawn to, is they know when they're listening to him, this is somebody who's seen it all and he's been a part of something that we all follow so closely.
For sure. But all of that resonates. And what's really interesting to me, there were two things really from a takeaway perspective where, we've talked about before, we put a lot of miles on our vehicles traveling from, with work, right? And going from one spot to another, and you listen to talk radio. And I know for you and I, a lot of it was, sports related. And, when Phil Jackson was coaching Jordan, and when Pat Riley was coaching, like the narrative within the media was always, well, yeah, but look, it isn't that hard. Like, I could roll, a couple of basketballs out and coach that team. And I think what was shared about everybody's completely off base when you start talking about, there's a difference between teams that have a lot of really good talent. And then there's a difference when you have a player that will truly transcend the game. And he was around
those guys.
Yeah. And how difficult it is to coach them, because they want you to push them. They need you to provide something that they can't provide. And now all of a sudden it's time for you to step up. And if you don't, they're done with you. Cause you said, they realize really quick, hey,
you don't have what I need.
You're really not going to push me to the point that I'm looking to be pushed, and or have the knowledge that I need to continue to grow. And I think go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you made me think about this, is that there's a lesson there for both sides of that, right? There's a lesson from a coach perspective, because to your point, as he said, the more elite talent you're dealing with, the more successful the individual you're dealing with, the more they demand out of you as a coach or leader. But then the other side, and I really want the listeners to hear this as well, is if you're striving to be, you know what they say about success leaves clues. If you're striving to be that successful player, that elite person, understand that all of those people just hunger for feedback. They need to be coached. They want to be coached. Like everybody, I think, to your point, thinks, oh, well, if I'm coaching, you know, Shaquille O'Neal or Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan or whatever, that I don't have to do a whole lot, but put the ball out there. And it's like, no, those are the ones that are going to test you. They're the ones that are going to be like, hey, what do you see? What do I need help with or whatever? And if your answer is, oh no, keep it up, kid, you're doing great. Guess what? That's not going to get it done. And
they're not looking for basic stuff either. They're looking for the nuance, any given Sunday speech, right? Where it's the inches. They're looking for the little bitty tricks and tips that will propel them, above and beyond. And, I thought that was really interesting. And I thought the other thing too, that he talked about, John, that just really, really from a personal standpoint or perspective was, he's surrounded by all these driven people, right? Because I don't care if you are the last guy on the bench on an NBA team, you can play. And I tell people all the time, like when I hear people going, oh, that guy's no good, or I'm like, buddy, do you realize, like,
right,
that guy would come out here and absolutely wear you out.
Yeah.
Period. But the one thing that I was going to say is the takeaway was even those guys who are the top 1%, they still need you to believe in them. Like when he talked about, like, believing in somebody goes a very, very long way. As a coach, you start really, at least I did, I really started to kind of think back to those men that led me as a coach, who I was willing to run through, the proverbial run through the wall for. Every one of them early on in our relationship as athlete and coach believed in me.
Yeah.
And maybe even when you didn't believe as much in yourself, they were like, hey, this is what you need to do. Here's the process. Be patient, so on and so forth, and all the stuff we talked about. But that was even at that level, even at a guy that has coached over 20 Hall of Fame basketball players, he valued and saw the importance of just letting your athletes know you believe in them.
Right.
And I think that goes across sports. It goes across everything.
No question about it. Parents, I mean, look, he talked about the power of words. I love the example he shared about his son going out and playing golf as a tryout for the college coach, and the college coach saying to him, stopping his car as they're leaving, and says, hey, I think you can become a professional player one day. Like that, just the fire that lights in you to be able to say to that person, I think you have, what do we always say about coaching is, the most helpless feeling a coach ever has is when they realize it's the day they realize, like, my expectations I have for my players are greater than the ones they have for themselves. Yes. Like, it's a really tough thing to try and get somebody to see it, the potential that they have.
Yes.
But you can work on that. And I think this is really timely from a parent perspective, quite frankly, because, you parents that are listening out there and you have kids that are going back to school and you are getting ready to start the new year with the new school year, and whether they're trying out for sports or they're just, trying to be the best student they can be this year, whatever the case may be, is understand that every single thing you say to them is going to have an impact. Like it's something that you can right from the get-go start out the school year by, rewarding the behaviors you wish to see repeated, by giving them an example of positive self-talk, by giving them an example of just what positive talk in general and productive talk. I think this is something that people need to understand, is that there's a difference in productive talk or even productive self-talk versus positive self-talk. Is like, sometimes you can, I think, get to a point where if you, as an athlete, as a employee out in the workforce or something like that, is you're going to have times where things just aren't going well. And I'll give you an example of you as a CrossFit athlete, somebody who has participated in CrossFit for a long time. There's times where you're in the middle of a workout and it just sucks. And that idea of you being like, oh, you're doing great, Brandon, way to keep it up, Brandon, that kind of thing or whatever. Your mind knows when you're just bullshitting yourself, right? Like, you can't, that's not going to do much for you in that period of time. But productive self-talk is that idea of saying, hey, one rep at a time, like something that's going to produce some action on your part or whatever. And I think it's really important to demonstrate and to share, those types of examples with your kids, is to let them know, like, hey, if you commit to doing these certain behaviors this year, you can have a really good year. I believe that you can have a really good year. But just reminding them of those types of things, I think, is going to be really important. So that's why I think a lot of this stuff that we're talking about on this show in general, not just today's episode, but in general, you have an opportunity to do that. And then the other thing about the school year is you think about something we talk about a lot, which is identity, and how those kids, man, they can tell themselves some stories from an identity standpoint. Like, I'm not a very good student. I'm not this, I'm not that, or whatever. And it's all those, like, what they call ants, right? Those automatic negative thoughts is just being able to catch those things when they're coming into their mind, and work with your kids on this, is being able to catch that automatic thought and understand, is this something that's going to help me? Going back to Tyler Pasick, right? Is it going to help me be a better student by thinking this about myself, or is it going to hurt me?
Absolutely. And I think to address that, and I feel like sometimes we get into these discussions that open, this maze that we could get into for hours at a time, right? But I mean, to have those kind of conversations, those types of conversations with your kids, or they're not always the easy conversation to have, right? They have to be vulnerable, and good luck in making trying to have a vulnerable conversation with a teenager, right? Especially one that when you go, hey, how was school? And they all will say, fine, good. It was good. Oh, really? What did you learn? Yeah, not a whole lot. Hey, what was the best thing about today? Lunch, PE, right? I mean, it can be difficult to have those conversations, but I think as a parent, if you know your child and the way to kind of allow yourself to get to a point to where they can have those kinds of discussions, like, hey, I am really kind of worried about math, or I am worried about this, that, or the other. The trick is getting there, but it's worth it if you can figure it out, because those little things open up so much more from a trust standpoint, from opening up and a credibility standpoint. I mean, it all just ties together. It's
and fight the urge to coach or parent early in the school year. Like, I really think that the more you can ask questions of your kids early in the school year, where you're just literally, when they answer, you just say these 3 words: tell me more. Tell me more about what you're just saying there, or whatever, and listen. And then when they get done talking about this or whatever, even if you think you have the most insightful thing that you can share with them, stop. just listen and be like, oh, okay, and then you do it the next day and you do it the next day or whatever. And then eventually when they get more and more comfortable with opening up and not feeling like, because as well-intentioned as you are, they're going to feel judged. They're going to feel like you're trying to, make them you or whatever the case may be. And sometimes they just want to talk. And so when you hear that, is just listen to them, fight the urge, and then start to sprinkle in later on down the road. You can start to sprinkle in, hey, something that you brought up, I think may help you, or, just throw that out there. And I also think, and this is good for business leaders as well, as they always say, don't be one of those leaders who tells your sales reps or your employees like all the great stuff you did. And I think, it's a good way of doing that. It's just saying, I know somebody wants to face this situation and this is how they handled it. Now it's about somebody else. It's not about you, even though the story is about you, but people do receive that better. And I think as parents, you can sometimes do that as well. It's just, even if it's the way you would handle it, just maybe use an example in the third person or something. Just because I just think that, to your point, it's like being able to communicate with teenagers is tough enough, but it's, if you can just get them talking and then encourage them to talk more and then be quiet. And then the next day you do the same thing. I think you'll open it up.
You will. And then, and then you kind of roll over to the other side, right? At some point as they mature, kind of what we've talked about before too, as they mature and you start to, that relationship starts to change a little bit, because we're both in a very similar situation where, you get out of the kind of parenting relationship to more of a peer
guidance,
guidance and really talking about, they get old enough to where they have like real world challenges and questions and things like that you can start to, share. And they're at that point, they really are looking for you to provide
give some insight.
And so that, and at like any relationship, and then that matures and, just kind of.
Yeah. Cause then you get to a point where, and we've talked a lot about this recently, is that, then the flip side of that is, as a adult child, like we are, to our parents, and as they get older and they have decisions they're making, now all of a sudden it's the child as an adult becomes the person who's trying to impart their input or what they perceive as their wisdom on their older, and I say older as in like, 70, above 70 or whatever, where they're starting to have some health issues or they're starting to have some different things going on. And then that can be a point of frustration on the reverse side, right? Like it's the child trying to talk to the parent and say, hey, I think maybe you should do this. I think you should do that. And sometimes at that stage in the game, they don't want to hear it. They're good.
There is an evolution of a relationship where I think there's an evolution of a relationship where the pendulum kind of shifts back to, okay, I've imparted everything that I can impart as a parent. You kind of get to the point to where you're somewhat peers a little bit, I mean, your kids are always your kids, but, then you start having some of those other conversations where you're like, hey, have y'all thought about this? Or, it may be good for y'all to do that or whatever. And you go, they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that from me. They're going to make their own decision. They still have this hierarchy. And they're going to make their decisions based upon what they think is best for them and not necessarily the input that is provided. And so, I mean, that can certainly create some challenges too.
So I'm glad we're talking about this, because I mentioned Tyler Pazek earlier, and I was telling him I recently had this experience where somebody was sharing with me some of their challenges with dealing with an elderly parent, and just, trying to convince them of doing it a certain way, or it was around medical decisions. And I just asked this question. I've been asking this question a lot lately of people, because one of the things we have stressed on this podcast is, as well as every other mental performance person that walks the face of the earth has it's talked about forever, is the idea of control versus those things, recognizing the things you can control versus things you can't control. Well, there's only so many different ways you can explain that to somebody. And people, yes, I have found, get tired of hearing me say, hey, it's out of your control. So what I've started to do, Brandon, is reframe that to a question when somebody is telling me a story, or explaining a situation to me where something's out of their control, is I just simply ask this question is, what is your role in this situation? So, and the thing about it, I was talking, because, we all know Tyler loves those questions. So when I got such good results out of asking that question of people, that I shared it with Tyler, and he was like, what I like about it is it's very specific. It's an answerable, like the person has to understand. It's not too vague. You're not saying what are the roles. It's what is your role? Your role, specific, yeah. Because what they find out is that in the decision-making process that you're talking about, you really don't have a role other than worrier, right? Like, sure, you're now worrying about this thing that's out of your control. So, and now we just use that as the person talking to an elderly parent or something like that. But apply that to anything in life. Like, as you start to worry about things, or not even worry, but if you just start to feel yourself thinking about, or being consumed with thoughts about a particular issue, is one of the things you can ask yourself is, what is my role in this? Mm-hmm. Because you're going to quickly realize, like, I don't have a role in it, other than I can stress about it, I can worry about it, I can, all those things. But that's when I think you need to, once you realize, okay, I don't have a role in it, now I can focus on other things I might have a role in. Mm-hmm. But if you don't, maybe the answer is you do have a specific role in it. And maybe now you have to just kind of feel out where that is, or what, and now what can I do? What's the next best decision I can make with this role? But I just think it's a good way of just kind of asking people to really be reflective on what, like, is this a circle of control thing or a circle of concern thing?
For sure. And but it also takes, we talk about those honest reflections too. And there are a lot of people that like to insert themselves into a much bigger role than they actually have. And I think asking that question, requires, some humility. I mean, I think you have to be able to go, you know what? I mean, I've kind of inserted myself into this. No one's asking for my opinion. No one is looking at me as a decision maker here. Nobody is seeking my wisdom. Why do I feel the need to impart it? And so I think, just like everything else, and we talk about it a lot, you got to be honest with yourself. And as you go through those types of assessments, you for sure have to know what your role is and be honest with it. Right. I mean, that's important. Really important.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's so critical, because like you're saying, there's a, understanding the people that we have in our circle. And like you said, is having that people having the self-awareness and where they are. And the whole thing is, as you start to really dive deeper into mental performance, and just this idea of like having the right mindset on things, is one of the things about self-awareness is sometimes it's also just stepping outside of the self for a minute and just having a general awareness of your circle, your people around you, because, whether it be something like recognize, release, and refocus, like it's something, I'm thinking about this because I heard this great podcast the other day that had a guest on there, Sindra Kampoff, who's a mental performance coach with the Minnesota Vikings. And it was on, I'll give the guy credit, it was on a podcast called The Mindset Advantage. So pretty close in the old name like there.
Infringement to me,
but it was a really great conversation that he was having with Sindra. And one of the things she was talking about was, and again, we've said this a million times on this show, is that there's not that many unique and novel concepts that anybody has in this particular arena, as much as everybody just reframes it or rephrases the same stuff. And she was talking about this idea of learn, burn, and return. And it made me, of course, think immediately to recognize, release, and refocus, which we've talked about is like recognizing the thought that you have, and then being able that, it's either in the future, it's in the past, or it's a present moment thought. Like, how's this going to help me? Or if it's something that's not going to help me, letting it kind of flow by. We've talked about neutral thinking and those things on the show. That's not what I started thinking about. I started thinking about how even when you recognize that you're having a thought that's not productive for your particular thing, is you can be willing to release it. But if you have a circle of people that are around you that like how influential they can be on your ability to release these things. Like I think about as a coach, I remember coaching with an individual one time, and they weren't maybe as they had a tendency to really focus on some of the negative aspects of things.
Sure.
And how much I recognized during the season when I was coaching with this individual that impacted the way that I was thinking about things, because as they were bringing things up that had happened back in the first inning and we're now in the fifth inning or whatever, like as much as I wanted to release those things and just focus on the present, they kept dragging me into the past. Does that make sense? Like it was just something that, and so when I was listening to this podcast the other day, as I was driving home from work, I was thinking like, wow, that's something that I hadn't really thought about a ton, but it's something that we should be more mindful of, is like how influential your circle can be on your own like thought process, and just being, mindful of it.
We don't necessarily think about it, but you then look at your social media feeds and, there's a reason that they have these algorithms that create these little echo chambers that, people get just extremely, extremely invested in, because they think that it's what everybody is invested in. And it's not. It's your little subset, your little clique. It's your, it's your little group that of you and maybe a couple of thousand people, or to your point, if it's like your intimate friend group, if one of y'all, I don't know, starts playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? And next thing you know, they kind of suck one or two other people in, and now the whole group eventually starts to get into that thing, and it really was because of the direction of one person and one decision. And now you think everybody does it, right? Because you get so invested in it. And I think that's the same way that it goes. And whether you're a coach, whether you're anybody, like you get invested and you start to think like, okay, I'm in this thing, I'm doing it, and we're going to do it this way. And it is very rare that, and it's why most people that are successful have these people around them to go, hey man, you're kind of like got a negative slant, and it's affecting our culture, instead of someone that piles on and goes, yeah, you know what, you're right. And I know we're in the fifth inning, but we are going to talk about this thing in the first inning. No, not the time. Like there's nothing you can do about it. That is not the time for reflection. And I think that, it's human nature, at least today, which is kind of sad, to be lazy. Mm-hmm. And I think that type of thinking and that type of behavior isn't because people don't know any different. It's because they're tired and they don't want to. It's not the mountain that they're gonna die on. It's just not. It's they'll go along or whatever, and then they think there's something else out there that they need to put their energy into, instead of calling that person out and holding them responsible. And especially if they are the leader or the coach or whatever, those individuals also have to be held accountable. And if you're not going to do it, who will? And, right. It's, you can't be lazy if you want to be a leader. I mean, you just can't.
Well, and I also think, I feel like this is a back to school type of episode, but I also think that kind of goes back to some lessons that parents can talk to their kids about at some point. Is, you've said this on the show before, is that, will you show me your friends, I'll show you your future, kind Absolutely. Of a thing. And it's like, it's really getting them, instead of you being the one who says that person's not good for your, future Timmy or Tommy or, whoever, whatever your kid's name is. Hopefully
starts with a T.
It may or may not have been on Leave It to Beaver. But it's one of those things that I think if you just use questions and you just ask them questions at some point, like, hey, talk to me about some of your friends or whatever. Do you feel like they're all kind of supportive of you? Do you feel like they're all kind of have your best interests at heart? Like those types of things or whatever. I think there's a way that you can start to unpack some of those things, start that conversation, because I do think that at a younger age, heck, I don't even know if this is exclusive just to kids. There's a lot of adults you and I know that we could be having that same conversation with about they have toxic people around them. 100%. That are maybe have some narcissistic tendencies or whatever the case may be. And, there's an old expression, you train people how to treat you, right? Like it's, if you're allowing this stuff
100%
to happen, in your circle of friends or whatever, one, you need to understand that what you accept to promote. So if you're accepting somebody's toxicity around you, or they're always dragging you down, or they're always trying to top you or one up you, and they're not supportive of you, they're not one of your best hype people, then that's probably not somebody that you want to have a long-term relationship with. Correct. Because you're going to continue to be in the same situation that you are now. Right. But understanding it's okay to walk away. It's okay to revise your life. It's okay to kind of clean house every so often. But I do think that you can demonstrate that to your kids by, they'll see some of that stuff. Like as you start to make some of those tough decisions about, and even if you're not a parent, like I feel like this is, I don't want to turn this into a parental guidance type of a show, but even if you're just somebody that's out there who has been, and I don't think people have to tell you whether or not you're in a toxic relationship with a friend or some friends or whatever. You have to be able to just look at it and say, hey, is this helping me or hurting me? Because if it's hurting me, it's probably not something I need to invest much more time in.
For sure. And that's, there's a difference between committing to and committing and quitting, right? And so like there's a difference between, for your own mental health and acuity, to leave some of that toxicity. That's not quitting on a relationship. That's actually growing for you, versus being committed to something you start, right? I start a season, I start a project, I do whatever, I'm committed to that. When you have some of that toxicity surrounding you, you have to quit some of those relationships. And, there's a big difference there. Because even when you leave that relationship or you leave those things, it doesn't mean that you can't revisit them. And it doesn't mean that you can't try to, just try to get to a point to where you can learn from it, but it doesn't mean you have to stay in it either. And that's just, that's not quitting. That's doing something and leaving something for your own benefit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you kind of look at it as like a bank account or whatever. I mean, we've all had people in our lives that were, it goes back to the area, an energy giver and an energy taker. And if you're surrounding yourself with a bunch of energy takers, then, I mean, and it's all withdrawals on your part. Like you're just doing nothing but withdrawing,
deposits.
No deposits. I mean, it can be exhausting. And, sure. I don't know. I do think that's something to be mindful of. And it's funny. I mean, we've started out this show kind of, we're headed in one direction, but it's always fun. I think the fun part of this podcast is to see where it takes you, because you just don't know. And hopefully there's things that people are going to be able to take, and it applies. And if you're open to the message, and then you'll it's going to meet you where you are, I think is the big thing. So anyhow, lots of good stuff to unpack there. And we've got lots of stuff coming up. We've got some really good guests that are coming on the show that I'm looking forward to. Not really going to release many names on that yet, but I continue to hear people give feedback that they like the fact that we're kind of expanding into, some that have these really motivational stories that they can learn a lot of lessons from, as well as those people who are teaching others how to do and demonstrating the application of some of these things. So we'll continue to look for that type of thing. Speaking of which, and we haven't mentioned this, I don't think we mentioned it on last episode, but don't forget about the MindView promo code.
Right.
So if you've got that, Brian Davidson, and they do such great work. But if you're looking to get onto their website, www.mindvue.com, that's mindvue.com, and you see some of whether it's the self-assessment, whether mindset assessment that you can take, whether it's the some of the classroom stuff that they do, online courses, whatever the case may be, enter MA20, that's the letter M, the letter A, 20, in the promotion code, and you'll get 20% off of that. Brendan Suhr, if we didn't mention on the last show, is that's all thanks to Brian Davidson and MindView as well, because that's how we learned about Coach. And so we're always thankful for Brian for continued to send such great guests our way. So that is all we've got for today. Looking forward to getting back with you guys next week, and hopefully as now fall and summer is kind of coming to a close, we'll get back into some pretty regular pattern here.
It seems to be the way. I guess next week will be, it's
September.
It's almost Labor Day weekend, right? Next weekend will be Labor Day weekend. So, wow. Yeah, I guess that is the official close of another summer. Although you wouldn't be able to tell it here. It's about,
I'm telling you,
it's about.
I know what it's probably like in
degrees.
Atlanta, but I mean in Nashville, it's like I walk outside and I'm like, it's just. But I still don't know if we've ever been as hot as it was in Charleston, South Carolina, when we're down there, in the middle of July or practicing. And it's just
it's different.
It's a different heat.
It's different. It's definitely different. It makes you more mentally tough, Right.
There you go. Look at you bringing the Segway back into it. Segway's not just a mode of transportation anymore.
No, it's not. That's amazing.
All right, brother. We will talk to you next week.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.